Eastwatch, the 5th episode of Season 7 of Game of Thrones, has aired, and I think it was another very strong episode. However, I do feel that of this season so far, it's probably been the weakest. That's not to say it was a bad episode, I just feel like every other episode has been so good. This one kind of slowed down a little bit, took more of its time, but at the same time I felt, went at breakneck speed in terms of the plot and characters meeting each other and advancing the story. So in one sense it was slower than past episodes we've seen. There were no grand battles or anything, but in another sense I felt like just people were appearing everywhere and meeting each other and then just carrying on. It was very fast in terms of how the story progressed. But, overall, I think it was a good episode. And join me as we discuss it in depth. At the end of the previous episode, we saw Bronn save Jaime from Drogon by jumping at him and getting them both out the way of Drogon's fire. And the episode aired with Jaime sinking to the bottom of the river, and it seemed like he could possibly have been dead or captured by Daenerys' forces. It seems like that's not the case though. Bronn managed to drag Jaime out of the river despite his armour, and they haven't been captured by Daenerys, which is weird to me because Tyrion saw Jaime fighting, so you think he would have said like, oh, I just saw Jaime down there, we should capture him. He would be a useful pawn in the war against Cersei. I suppose you could argue Jaime was trying to protect his brother, but at the same time, I think Tyrion knows he could convince Daenerys not to kill Jaime. So, if Jaime goes up again against Daenerys in battle, he could well die there. So I felt it was a bit strange that Jaime hadn't been captured, but still, in the chaos of war, I guess he and Bronn could have slipped away. But I have to say I'm a little bit disappointed Jaime wasn't captured. I feel like that would have been a real nice arc. He was captured during the battle against Robb. It would have been kind of history repeating itself had he been captured by Daenerys. I would have liked to see Emilia Clarke and Nikolai Coster-Waldau have screen time together and share their sides of the story. But it seems like, at least for now, that's not going to happen. The remaining survivors of the battle are rounded up and placed in front of Daenerys and Drogon, and Daenerys gives the men a choice. She says, you can either join my forces and bend the knee to me as your new queen, or you can die. And that's not really much of a choice. I know which one I'd have gone for. I'd have been on my knee so fast, okay? However, Randall Tarly, he may have been a shit father to Sam, but he is a kind of honourable man in his own sense. He refuses to bend the knee to Daenerys, says, look, I've got a queen, I pledge my allegiance to her, whatever road that takes me down, so be it. And Daenerys is like, well, then you can burn with Drogon. And unfortunately, Dickon Tarly also insists that he won't bend the knee. And I think that's a really shame. I really liked the character of Dickon. I liked how he, people didn't take him seriously, but then he proved himself during the battle. He seems like a much fairer guy than Randall. I was hoping he might meet his brother Sam again. But he refused to bend the knee as well. And both he and his father got burnt by Daenerys. I thought it was very telling that Randall, when Dickon says he won't bend the knee either, Randall says, shut up, what are you doing? But he wouldn't. And, as I say, Randall isn't the nicest guy in Westeros, but I thought that was a good scene, and I felt for the Tarlys, and, I feel like that scene in general, Daenerys was kind of the bad guy in it, she wouldn't accept the fact that they were soldiers and they were carrying out their orders. She gave them a chance to live, sure, but I feel like the punishment was harsh that she gave out. Tyrion seems to agree. He said, perhaps we could, send Randall to the wall. And Daenerys, to be fair, agreed with that, but Randall, again, put his foot in his mouth and just went, only a true queen can send me to the wall. And Daenerys didn't like that. And so we saw Drogon incinerate both the Tarly men. And, I thought that was a shame, and I thought it was a very good scene, because as I say, Daenerys didn't look so good in that scene. She was pretty ruthless. And it seems like Tyrion shares that sentiment. You could see he was doing everything he could without seeming disloyal to try and spare as many men as possible. And, after they got fried, the rest of the men seemed to pledge their allegiance to her. But I thought it was a very interesting scene and, shows how kind of the soldiers in war, they may fight against you at one point, but they're really just doing what they have to do. And, I thought it was very telling. And Daenerys, I get, being a ruler isn't always easy. You're not always going to look like the good guy or girl in her case. But, it was tough to see someone who's gone from freeing slaves to burning men alive for not pledging loyalty, very much harkening back to the Mad King. Jaime manages to return to King's Landing. I really liked how his armour was kind of melted and dirty and covered in ash, and he really looked like he'd been through it. And he finds Cersei, and first of all he tells her that it was actually Olenna who killed Joffrey and not Tyrion. To be honest, I think deep down Cersei always kind of had a strong hunch Tyrion didn't kill Joffrey, but she hated him so much for other things that she convinced herself at the end that that's what happened. But Jaime kind of assured her that it really was Olenna that killed her firstborn son. And, she's angry at Jaime for allowing Olenna a quick death, but that's how it goes. Jaime says to Cersei he doesn't think they can win this war. Now, Cersei, she's definitely not the wisest ruler, but when she looks at Jaime, she sees an experienced commander. She knows he knows what he's talking about. And I think even she kind of, understood that given the dragons now are in play and that they are as powerful as they've been built up to be, it does look like the Lannisters have a serious disadvantage. And she says, look, we're fucked either way. I'm going to go out swinging, which you kind of have to respect. I mean, what would Daenerys do with Cersei if Cersei just surrendered to her? Would she allow her to live? Who knows? But, the Lannisters are proud. Then I certainly can't see Cersei bending the knee to Daenerys. Perhaps Jaime might. I hope he does. But who knows? But, Cersei seemed to recognise that they're not on the winning streak they were. We then go to Dragonstone, where Jon Snow is brooding out over the sea, looking handsome as ever, and Daenerys returns on Drogon. And Drogon and Jon share a moment there. Drogon kind of stops in front of him and sniffs him. Jon presents his hand to him to sniff. And, I think that's definitely a nod to the fact that Jon has Targaryen blood. Dragons don't really seem to give a shit about anyone who isn't a Targaryen. And the fact that Drogon was so interested in Jon, I think, is an obvious nod to the fact that he and Daenerys are really related. I have to say that I'm surprised Drogon was flying again so quickly after having taken the ballista to kind of his, what would you call that, the shoulder where his wing comes out. We saw in the battle he had to land immediately. It wasn't a fatal blow, but it had impaired him, and yet he seemed fine in this episode, which took place not long after the last one. So I guess dragons are tough, but I'm surprised he was up and about so quickly. I would have thought perhaps there would be a bit more worry over the fact Drogon was wounded, but it seems not. But again, as I say, this episode went very quickly, and they can't spend as much time as they used to on advancing the plot. We haven't got many episodes left, so it's going quickly. After Jon had his sensual moment with Drogon, Jorah appeared to Daenerys, and that was a really nice reunion between the two. You can tell Jorah still is madly in love with Daenerys, and Daenerys was certainly pleased to see him. It's still unrequited love, unfortunately for him. But you can tell she cares about him. She's forgiven him for his past transgressions against her. And, she was really glad to have him back and see him cured of grayscale. And it's good to see Dany get an old ally returning to her. If it wasn't for Jorah, she'd have been dead in season 1. And it's good to see the old bear reunited with the dragon. We then see that Bran is warging into a flock of crows, and he uses them kind of UAV style NSA to scout north of the wall, where he flies over the army of the undead, being commanded by the Night's King, and he sees them all marching towards Eastwatch, sorry. And the Night's King, he knows what Bran's up to. He looks at the ravens and they flock away suddenly. I thought that was very cool. I like the idea that even when he's walking, Bran is kind of scared of the Night's King, and well, he should be, because we remember the Night's King was able to grab Bran by the arm last time he encountered him. So yeah, Bran knows that they're heading to Eastwatch, but the Night's King, I don't think is too bothered about the fact Bran knows. But it was a very cool scene. I loved how it was shot as though you were one of the ravens flying. Really excellent, and it was great to see. It's always great to see the White Walkers in force. Over at the Citadel, Sam is still desperately trying to convince the Maesters to take the threat of the White Walkers seriously, but he's not having a lot of luck. I like the fact that the Maesters aren't being portrayed as kind of snobbish dickheads who just don't believe him. But the fact is they have no evidence of this. As they say, countless prophecies before have predicted the end of Westeros and they've never come true. I like the fact that, you know, they seem to quite like Sam and stuff, but they can't just suddenly drop everything and back this idea that White Walkers are coming, because they have no evidence. But Sam is getting increasingly frustrated at the Citadel, and he hasn't learned by that point that his father and his brother are dead, as one of the Maesters points out. And we didn't see Sam learn that in this episode. I assume we will at some point. I'll be interested to see how he reacts to that, because obviously he and his father had a very difficult relationship. However, he and his brother seem to get on okay. His brother seemed like a top bloke. So, you know, I think that he will have some sadness for that. We then got a massive bombshell dropped at us when Sam's studying through the books. Gilly starts reading out a passage that seems to say that a Maester annulled the marriage between Rhaegar Targaryen and Elia Martell, his rightful wife, and secretly married Lyanna Stark at the Tower of Joy, which means that if Rhaegar and Lyanna, as we suspect, are Jon's real parents, Jon is not actually a bastard because they were secretly married. Now, I have to say, the book lover of Game of Thrones inside of me has to kind of go like, oh, of course there was a secret marriage. You know, like, as I say, there's so many plot points just went really quickly in this episode. You know, but I'm sure more time will be taken if that does happen in the books. It may not. He may still be a bastard. But I do have to question how marriage works in Westeros. I was under the impression you couldn't annul marriages like that. I would have thought he'd at least have needed Elia Martell's consent to do that. But again, marriage in Westeros seems to kind of play it by ear according to what the plot needs to do. You know, Tyrion said in an earlier episode of this season that his marriage to Sansa wasn't legitimate because they didn't consummate the marriage, which I didn't think was true, but it seems to be for the sake of the plot. I don't know, it's kind of up in the air. But still, that was a big bombshell to drop. However, Sam didn't pick up on it at all, because obviously he thinks that Ned Stark is Jon's real father, and he just got frustrated and said, well, that doesn't help me defeat the White Walkers, does it? It completely went over his head, which is rare for Sam. And in the end, he thought, screw it. He decided to steal some books about White Walkers and headed off with Gilly, presumably back to the Wall, to help fight against the White Walkers and to help Jon. We then cut to a really good scene back at Dragonstone where Tyrion has taken to drinking, as he always seems to do when he's upset, and he's joined by Varys, and the two discuss Daenerys' actions of burning the men that wouldn't join her alive. And there was a great piece of dialogue from Varys who said, you know, he used to try and comfort himself when he served the Mad King by saying, you know, I may have had a hand in causing these deaths, but I'm not the one ordering them, you know. And it's clear that Daenerys' actions are weighing heavy on them. They're worried that she might be turning into her father. I still think it's too early to say. However, a lot of people suspect that the series might end with Daenerys perhaps turning into her father. Who knows? And, you know, their efforts may have been in vain. As I say, I feel it's too early to label her like that at this point. But I thought it was a great scene where, you know, Tyrion and Varys, two men who seem to want to do the right thing, were kind of questioning their loyalty to Daenerys. And, you know, you could tell they weren't pleased by the events that had happened. We then go to the Dragonstone strategy war room where Davos and Tyrion decide that they'll go into King's Landing. Meanwhile, Jon says he's going to go back to the Wall to get evidence of a White Walker, and Jorah Mormont says he'll accompany him. So some plans are in action now. Davos obviously was an excellent smuggler, so he could smuggle Tyrion in, and Tyrion is planning to speak to Jaime to try and broker an armistice between Cersei and Daenerys while they gather proof that the White Walkers are real. Back at Winterfell, Arya and Sansa have some tension when Arya kind of accuses Sansa of working against Jon, and there's a lot of tension between those two characters. Arya is kind of a more upfront and honest character who uses her fighting skills to avoid danger, whereas Sansa, she's no warrior. She has to play the game a bit more, and so therefore has to sometimes do things that aren't necessarily as moral as a Stark would like. However, I feel like it's certainly too early to accuse Sansa of undermining Jon or of planning to betray him. However, Arya obviously is kind of worried about this and seeing early signs. She doesn't trust Littlefinger at all, and there's a bit of friction between those two, and I hope it comes to nothing, but I would hate to see the Stark family kind of torn apart from the inside by mistrust for one another. Bronn then leads Jaime down below King's Landing where the dragon skulls are stored. He does it under the pretense that they're going to spar together, but it's revealed that Tyrion is there to meet with Jaime to discuss this armistice. I thought it was a very interesting meeting because the last time they met, Jaime freed Tyrion from his prison after he was accused of murdering Joffrey. Did him real solid there. However, Tyrion then used that opportunity to kill Tywin, which pissed Jaime off no end. So Jaime's pissed off, as you can imagine, but the two, have always been friends, and it was difficult for them, obviously. Tyrion was clearly pleased to see Jaime. Jaime, I've got the feeling he was glad to see Tyrion, but was also angry at him. And, Tyrion says, look, we need to prove to Cersei that this threat is real. It doesn't matter who's on the Iron Throne if the White Walkers aren't stopped. And Jaime generally seems to agree to this eventually. He puts his personal feelings aside. I thought it was great to see Nikolai Coster-Waldau and Peter Dinklage acting off each other again. I've really enjoyed Jaime and Tyrion scenes together, and hopefully we'll get to see more of them. I feel like there was some more things they could have discussed, such as the battle. Tyrion could have been like, dude, I saw you charge that dragon. And maybe that would have been an opportunity for Jaime to say, like, why didn't you catch me? And Tyrion would be like, look, I just wanted you to get away, okay? Like, maybe they could have expanded on that a bit. But as I say, time is short. We're barreling onwards. But, it was good to see them again. And then finally, a character we haven't seen for years, Gendry, reappears. It turns out he sneaked back into King's Landing and has been working there as a blacksmith. Now, Davos knows that he's a bastard of Robert Baratheon's, and he meets Gendry and says, you should join us to help fight the White Walkers. However, he says you should keep your heritage a secret and, don't tell anyone who you are. Like, there's enough shit going on at this point. Gendry says he's been waiting for this for years, just like we have. I was kind of thinking he'd been written out by this point of the series. But no, he's back. And it looks like he's ready to kick ass. I loved how, he looks a bit older now. In the books, he's described as looking like a young King Robert. I feel like that's very true for the show. That is what I imagine Robert looked like during the rebellion. And when Davos says, could you swing a sword? He says, no, but I've got a warhammer. And he brings out this massive warhammer. And it was so cool to see that. And, he's fucking jacked and he looks like he could seriously fuck shit up with that warhammer. He really looks like a true son of Robert's. Then, in King's Landing, Cersei reveals to Jaime that she knew that Bronn had set up a meeting between him and Tyrion. Now, this seems kind of odd to me, but at the same time might say some things about Cersei's frame of mind at this point. One could argue that if Cersei knew that Tyrion was in King's Landing and planning to meet with Jaime, then why didn't she capture Tyrion? Because that would have been a great trump card for her to use against Daenerys as a hostage. Imagine if Daenerys had Jaime and Cersei had Tyrion. That would cause a lot of negotiation to be needed between the two, much like when Robb Stark had Jaime and the Lannisters had Sansa. However, she allowed the meeting to happen and allowed Jaime to speak with him and didn't seem too pissed off about it. Now, you could argue that was poor decision for her to make. However, you could also argue, I think, that perhaps she is kind of beginning to take the idea of White Walkers seriously. I mean, after all, she didn't believe in dragons a few days ago, and now it's been confirmed dragons are back. Perhaps the idea of White Walkers returning to Westeros isn't such a crazy idea to a lot of people now. So perhaps she's proving herself to be more of a shrewd commander these days. There have been several comparisons between her and Tywin lately. This sounds like the kind of thing Tywin might have done. So, maybe she's going through that vein. However, Book Cersei loathes Tyrion, and I seriously doubt she would pass up an opportunity to capture and kill him. But, given that she now knows Tyrion didn't kill Joffrey, perhaps she has less reason to hate him, at least the show version. But she did kill Tywin, so, you could argue it was strange for her to allow him into King's Landing, but you could also argue that she might have seen it for the greater good. And she also says, she agrees that the Lannisters may not win this war, and perhaps it's kind of good to have a certain amount of trust between your enemy, or at least respect, so that if they do lose, perhaps Daenerys won't execute her, but we'll see where that pans out. Jon and Gendry then meet, and despite Davos's advice, Gendry decides to reveal right away that he is Robert Baratheon's bastard. And as I say, this I think is more another example of the plot just carrying on as quickly as possible. There was no build up to that or anything. He basically goes, "Hi, I'm Rob's bastard. Nice to meet you." And as I say, it kind of it's very almost heavy-handed. I think how quickly the plot is just going onwards. But at the same time, it's nice not to just dance around that for loads of episodes. And it was cool to see someone who is considered to be Ned Stark's bastard tagging out with Robert Baratheon's bastards. Obviously, Robert and Ned were very close, and seeing their children together, even though Jon actually isn't Ned's child, seeing them together, is going to be very inspiring for people who knew Ned and Rob. Littlefinger has gone from the creeper to the creeped on, as Arya is shadowing him everywhere he goes. She clearly distrusts him a great deal. No one can blame her. She sneaks into his room and finds the message which he had fetched from the Maester's archive, which, if you saw, was the letter that Cersei had Sansa write to Robb Stark telling him to bend the knee to Joffrey after Ned had been imprisoned. Now, Arya had escaped by that point and doesn't know that Sansa was kind of coerced into writing this letter. She only wrote it because she hoped it might save her father's life. However, from Arya's point of view, where she doesn't know that, she may think that Sansa kind of had a certain amount of disloyalty towards Robb, or was siding more with the Lannisters at that point. So this may create even more tension between Arya and Sansa. However, when Arya leaves Littlefinger's room with that message, we then see Littlefinger double creeping on her, having known that she was going to go into his room. So it seems like he wanted her to find this letter, or at the very least he's aware she's onto him. So where will this go? Will Littlefinger outmaneuver Arya and end up maybe killing her, or putting her in a situation where Sansa has her kicked out of Winterfell? Or will Arya outmaneuver Littlefinger and probably end up killing him with Needle? I certainly hope it's that. If you've been watching my videos, you know I despise Littlefinger. I think he's a slippery little toad and he needs to just get smashed in the face. I've wanted that since season 1. He's a scheming bastard and he needs to get his. So you can tell whose side I'm on. But yes, Littlefinger, he's knows how to survive. Arya kind of tends to rely more on her fighting skills than her wits, although she does have plenty of them. So I hope she's careful, she doesn't underestimate him. And I hope that the two Stark girls, Sansa and Arya, work together to destroy Littlefinger. That would be great. But this is Game of Thrones, so it might end terribly. Then in the final scene, we saw what I like to call the Magnificent Seven march out north of the wall to embark on their mission to capture a White, to prove to the Southerners that the White Walker threat is very real. We had Doris of Myr, Gendry, Jon Snow, Sander Clegane, Beric Dondarrion, Davos and Jorah Mormont all working together to go on this mission, which is going to be tough. I don't think this is going to be easy for them. I think it's very possible we might see at least one character die, and I don't want it to be any of them. I like all of those characters, you know, there's not one that I feel is disposable. If I had to guess, perhaps it could be, it's hard to say, perhaps Thoros of Myr, he's dead in the books at this point. Perhaps Beric Dondarrion. You know, who knows? It's hard to say. I hope it's not the Hound. I really like that dude, but you know, I think Jon will survive. I hope Jorah survives and gets to see Daenerys again. It's a tough one, you know, but I think, you know, the next couple of episodes are going to focus on their mission, and I don't think this is going to be easy. They will encounter White Walkers, obviously, and you know, they'll do their best to destroy them. Now, Jon Snow has Longclaw with him, obviously, which can defeat White Walkers if they do encounter any. But it didn't seem to show them with any obsidian. Perhaps they have brought obsidian, and we'll see that in the next episode. I hope so, because they know that's the only thing that can kill whites, and they may well have to kill a few of them in order to take one hostage. So I really hope they weren't dumb enough to just go out with ordinary steel. But we'll see. As I say, this episode, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good episode. However, I think it was the weakest one so far. And I've got to say, the neck-breaking speed of the series of the story, you know, was particularly heavy in this episode. And, you know, it just seems like things are going so fast, you don't have time to catch your breath. Very different to the earlier seasons, which really were more paced. But that's the nature of the beast. That's how it's going. They seem to want to wrap it up sooner rather than later. So, okay. Let me know what you thought of this episode. How do you think it compares to the rest? Do you mind the story going so fast? Do you wish it would be slower paced? Let me know what you thought. I'll see you guys next time for the next episode review. Vala Magoulis.